Good evening, our dear viewers, and welcome to our special program on the passing away of former United States President George Bush Sr. We have distinguished guests for you tonight who will speak about the President Bush's role in the liberation of Kuwait in 1991. We have also with us now Dr. Fawaz Al-Ajmi, Assistant Professor at the Mass Communication Department at the University of Kuwait. And later on, we will have with us U.S. Ambassador to the State of Kuwait, His Excellency Lawrence Silverman, who will provide us with a glimpse of Bush's achievements as a distinguished United States statesman. We begin our show tonight with a report on Bush's administration role in the liberation of Kuwait.
On the 2nd of August 1990, large sections of the Iraqi army crossed the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border towards Kuwait City. Iraqi armored vehicles and tanks penetrated deep into Kuwait and controlled major centers throughout the country. The Iraqi army also controlled Kuwaiti radio and television stations. Thousands of Kuwaiti civilians were arrested, along with large numbers of foreigners who were in Kuwait at the time and were subsequently taken hostage. It became clear then that the world was put into a test. The aggression was a challenge to international law and norms, which prohibit any given country from occupying and annexing other nations just because it can. However, confronting the aggression and forcing it to roll back requires strong, well, and firm determination to make sacrifices and take dire decisions. It was also obvious that it was up to the United States, under the leadership of President George Bush, to shoulder this responsibility and lead the world. It was the only superpower nation with the military and political capability to unite the world against this aggression. Hours after the invasion, Kuwait and the United States demanded an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council and passed UN Security Council Resolution 660, which condemned the invasion and called for the withdrawal of Iraq from Kuwait. In the wake of the invasion, U.S. President Bush vowed that the aggression against Kuwait would not stand and immediately embarked on uniting the U.S. political spectrum on this mission, while working with U.S. allies in Europe and the Middle East to form an international coalition force, including more than 400,000 U.S. troops. To prevent Iraq from expanding its invasion to Saudi Arabia, the Bush administration began on August 7, 1990, Operation Desert Shield by sending troops to the Arabian Peninsula. In the midst of these military rallies, a series of resolutions were issued by the Security Council, the most important of which was UN Security Council Resolution 678, which set January 15, 1991 as a deadline for Iraq to withdraw its forces from Kuwait. On January 21, 1991, the U.S. Senate approved the use of military force to liberate Kuwait, which was followed by a similar approval from the U.S. House of Representatives. At the dawn of January 16, 1991, one day after the end of the deadline granted by the Security Council for Iraq to withdraw troops from Kuwait, the United States led a coalition aircraft in a large-scale air campaign involving the whole of Iraq, from the north to the south, conducting more than 100,000 airstrikes in 43 days, using more than 60,000 tons of bombs. The coalition strategy was based on the war of attrition, with the Iraqi army being weakened by aerial bombardment, followed by ground offensives launched by about 1 million soldiers, accompanied by armored vehicles and artillery pieces backed by Air Force. On February 26, U.S. President Bush announced, "Kuwait has become liberated, and that the Iraqi army has been defeated."
For the sake of the Kuwaiti people, we stood our ground, because the world would not look the other way. Ambassador El Sabah, tonight, Kuwait is free. Where is it? We are very happy about that.
Welcome back, our dear viewers, to this special program on the passing away of former President George H.W. Bush. We have with us tonight Dr. Fawaz Al-Ajmi, Assistant Professor of the Mass Communication Department at the University of Kuwait. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me in this special event and talking about this distinguished person who had a great effect on Kuwait history for sure.
Yes.
And we all as Kuwaitis are sad to hear this news, and may God rest his soul in peace.
Yes. Dr. Fawaz, could you tell us how important was the United States' role in the liberation of Kuwait?
For sure, it was a great effort that the United States, by the leading of George Bush, at that time, it had a great efforts at that time, and by having all of the countries around the world gathering to be against this invasion and to have the liberation of Kuwait at that time, standing with us, as we have seen in this report, how George Bush tried to assure us about the efforts of the United States and of liberation of the Kuwait. So it's not only by like the militaries only, and it's also political efforts that he provided at that time, showing us his support, showing us his how much important Kuwait is and how much the people of Kuwait are important to the United States at that time.
Yes, Dr. Fawaz, could you tell us a little bit more about how did the Bush administration rally support in the United States and into the international arena, you know, for the liberation of Kuwait?
Talking about political aspect, he had a great Bush on the UN Security Council, trying to have their support as well for the liberation of Kuwait. Also in the military side, sending more than 400,000 troops to Kuwait, leading the Allies troops at that time. For sure, it had a great effect on Kuwait, on the situation itself, and having Kuwait like the freedom of Kuwait at that time.
Yeah, and on the international scene, you know, the United States was one of the main countries that really pushed hard to support the war to liberate Kuwait.
Exactly.
Now, how can you tell us about, you know, the importance of having the U.S. military in this war, you know, to liberate Kuwait compared with the other coalition partners?
For sure, it helped in like fastens the liberation of Kuwait, kicking out the Iraqi military out of the Kuwait land, and having Kuwait, having the freedom of Kuwait faster than it could be, because the number of the troops, as we mentioned before, and the numbers of other troops from other countries around the world who all support these efforts, the United States efforts, and Saudi and other countries like GCC countries efforts at that time, to show how much Kuwait is important, and how much and supporting the rights of Kuwait to have its freedom from this from this occupation.
You know, the United States, with many other countries, you know, they had a lot of contributions in their efforts, you know, to liberate Kuwait. But how did the United States contributions in particular affect the relationship between the two countries?
Kuwait and the United States for sure has a great relationship, has a great cooperation throughout all of the time in the past and in these recent days, and also in the future. We have all see how much important the relationship between both countries throughout all of the administrations in the United States and in Kuwait. Having that in mind, we can tell how important, how many Kuwaiti students in the United States now, and how many Kuwaiti diplomats there as well in the United States now, and how much the trades between the two countries as well. So we have a strong relationship, and that reflects the United States efforts to have Kuwait liberation at that time, for sure, by the lead of Bush administration.
Yeah, so Dr. Fawaz, how do you see the future of the relationship between the United States and Kuwait after the liberation?
We have seen lots of cooperation between both countries in different disciplines and different aspects, and we have seen lots of like correlation in our relationship. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah and has many times mentioned how important the relationship between the both countries, and in his like meetings with the US leaders he also always mentioned how important this kind of relationship, and in different kind of aspects and situations.
Okay. Talking back about former President George Bush Sr., you know, having served 2 terms as Vice President, and he was the first Vice President to become President of the United States, all these years of experience, how did this help him in gathering support, you know, with the international arena, you know, for the war to liberate Kuwait? If we can just talk about that in specific.
The wisdom of his leadership helped us as Kuwaitis, for sure, to have this huge number of countries that support the right of Kuwait to has its freedom and liberation, and he succeeded in like gathering all of the countries, all of these militaries to help us, to help Kuwait at that time and at that period. We know that it's not only like a military decision, it's also a political decision. If we don't have that political decision, if we don't have that political cooperation, we couldn't have done it this way. So he used his wisdom and he used his like experience at that time to succeed in that matter, and in having us having Kuwait liberated from the Iraqi invasion.
Yes. Dr. Fawaz, we're talking today about former President George Bush Sr. and his role in liberating Kuwait. And he came to visit Kuwait after the liberation, and he continued that relationship, you know, with the Kuwaiti leaders all over the years, even after, you know, that he left the office. Can we talk a little bit about him as, you know, a leader? You know, having gone through a war, the Gulf War, and he succeeded in that, and he liberated Kuwait. And also his time when he took office, it was during the Cold War era, you know, when the Soviet Union just collapsed. So can we talk about him as a strong statement?
He had a strong personality. He was a great leader, for sure. And we as Kuwaitis have seen that during that time, and we have seen how important he was, and what kind of experience he got at that time as a great leader. Even when he came to visit us in Kuwait, we showed him how much important he is as a leader for us as Kuwaiti, and how much we appreciate his work and appreciate his efforts with the Kuwaiti rights at that time. So he was a great leader, and he served the United States for 2 periods as a president. So it was like a great, it reflects in the US relationship with other countries, especially with Kuwait and GCC countries.
Yes. Dr. Fawaz, is there anything else you would like to add, you know, in regards to former President George Bush Sr.?
For sure, we just tell our friends in the United States how much we are sad to hear this kind of news, and we appreciate all of the efforts that he gave us as Kuwaitis throughout all of the time, and that shows how much important he was to us in Kuwait. And we really sorry to lose him at this time, and the only thing that we can say is like may God rest his soul in peace, for sure.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Fawaz. Our dear viewers, on your behalf, we would like to thank our first guest for being with us tonight, Dr. Fawaz Al-Ajmi, Assistant Professor at the University of Kuwait. And now we have to take a break, and we'll be right back with our next guest, so please stay with us.